We want to welcome you to episode 253 of the 6G podcast. It's the latest inside scoop on everything 6G. We cover about 6 topics in roughly 30 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Anshel Sog, and joining me again this week is fellow analyst Mike Dano from Ookla. Hey, Mike, I know we took a little bit of a break, but how are you doing?
I'm good. Yeah. The break was nice. I had a long time objective has been to climb Mount Rainier. So during our break, that was one of the things that I did is I got to climb Mount Rainier. So far a successful summer. Hopefully you had a good break also.
Uh, I wouldn't call it a break. I would call it me traveling to conferences. But
I saw you're all over the place.
I did go to Taiwan for Computex. I also went to Long Beach for Augmented World Expo. I also attended a bio conference this week in San Diego. So I've been busy, but that's normal. So it's not really a big deal.
Sounds busy. Yeah, you look a lot smarter from having been to all the conferences.
I just shaved my head.
That too.
Um, I guess we'll kick it off with the first topic. This is one that's kind of been a rolling topic, but it's a popular topic, and just a little bit more detail on some of the things and perspectives of things that are going on around the World Cup. And I've been following pretty closely. I don't know if you've been watching at all. It seems like a lot of people in the U.S. suddenly get excited every 4 years about the World Cup. But this is like the first time we're having it in the U.S. in a very long time, something like 30 years. So, yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I've been enjoying it. It's been interesting to see, the use of technology, especially Lenovo, which is the the official technology partner for FIFA, and you see their logos everywhere. And it's almost in so many places you don't even notice where it actually is. But I would say the most important one is um, I mean, I like it, but it's not the most important one. It's the referee cam. They have like a headset that the referee wears just to communicate with other refs, but also there's a camera on that ref, and that ref is you can actually see the ref's perspective when a play occurs, and when they do a replay, you can see what the ref sees from their perspective, whether it's a goal, a penalty, or something like that. There are other technologies that are being used in conjunction with this headset and camera for like video assistant. So they're doing 3D player avatars. So what Lenovo does is they scan the players, and when there's like an offside, because they're using the Eagle Eye technology, which kind of has cameras placed all over the entire stadium, and if it's like the ball's over the line, if it's past the goal, if it's offsides, or some other kind of measurement like that needs to happen, they have this already real time, and the referee can basically confer with the other referees in the booth if that's the case, and then they show like a visual representation of the dude's head being past the line or whatever it is. So they're trying to level up the experience in multiple ways. The 5G aspect is the referee's whole setup is 5G. It is millimeter wave. It was interesting because I actually watched the Qualcomm guys say, "Hey, look, it's 5G millimeter wave," and that's probably going to be a Verizon setup. And then on top of that, Lenovo's got all these other things like they've got uh, digital twin setup for smart wayfinding. They've got much higher broadcast quality. There's 4K basically in all these games now. They also have an AI assistant that's running in real time. That's more of like an infrastructure data center kind of thing. They also have the World Cup edition phones. But yeah, I think it's really interesting to see how high tech this World Cup has become. Um, and I think 5G isn't playing as big of a role as I thought it would be. But I also think if you look at like let's say T-Mobile, they put out a whole press release saying that their speeds are the best in the most cities where World Cups are being played. So everybody wants to jockey for their angle. I haven't heard AT&T say anything, but Verizon and T-Mobile definitely have put out their thoughts and
Yeah.
statements.
Yeah, it's been fun to watch. I mean, I'm not much of a sports guy, but to the great chagrin of most of the people here at UCLA, I know we have a whole team in Latin America, and they just cannot understand how anyone could not be super into the World Cup right now. But I've been watching it kind of from afar. I've been watching Lionel Messi, apparently rack up all the records this year. But I would say so in terms of you're right. It's like it seems like the development of stadium technology uh, has been slowly moving forward. I think that this year is the first year where the tickets are mostly digital, meaning you can't print out a ticket; it's only on your phone. So you do have to have coverage as you enter the stadium and get scanned in and go to these games. Before the World Cup started, I will say that I did do a quick report on World Cup preparedness before the thing started, and we did here at UCLA, we did find out that it was Mercedes-Benz Stadium is the one that is sort of head and shoulders. We did a zip code level check of all of the different stadiums that are involved, and as most of the U.S. stadiums, the two stadiums in Canada and then the three in Mexico in that order. But it was definitely Mercedes-Benz Stadium was the one that really stood out in terms of overall connectivity, which is not a surprise. It's a pretty new stadium, so newer the stadium, newer the technology is they really devote a lot of space within these stadiums for the network components. I mean, I did do a tour of one of the stadiums here in Denver, and they have literally a gigantic room dedicated inside the stadium just to networking components, just to run that stuff. And so some of them go, all the way to putting the Wi-Fi AP access points underneath people's seats. So it's like the modern stadiums really devote a lot of time and energy into putting these networks up and running. And so I'm sure that will obviously continue into 6G. But yeah, it is interesting to watch how, as these stadiums get more advanced, the technologies that then proliferate into the fan experience, whether it's ordering hot dogs at your seat or if it's, like you said, to the referees or including that technology into integrating it into aspects of the game itself. I think it's slowly been making its way in there, and I would expect to see more of that. Right, I would expect to see more innovation as the years go by in terms of sporting events and stadium experiences.
Yeah, I also feel like a lot of them underinvested um, when they should have invested during COVID because they had the time and the resources.
That's true.
Um, but then they didn't, and then they went back to their old ways of not investing, very much. So I think we're in a place where like we probably could be in a much better situation in terms of performance and capacity, but we're not. I've gone to multiple venues where I expected to have serviceable service, and it wasn't really the case, even in new stadiums. So, like, the whole neutral host situation is also a challenge, but I haven't really heard anybody complain about performance in stadiums. And, we've seen a good fair share of like videos probably uploaded from the stadium. It's unclear, but yeah, I would say connectivity doesn't seem to be a challenge this time around. I also think it helps that um, a lot of um, you know a lot of the stadiums are newer, so they don't have really old infrastructure. I think the oldest one is the Kansas City Stadium. Um, but yeah, it's just interesting to see how the stadiums themselves have been really uh, shining during this World Cup, and a lot of people are very happy with the experience. Not really knowing about the actual connectivity aspect of it.
Yeah, a lot of work goes into that, right? Yeah, and we have been talking about doing a comprehensive look at World Cup traffic. Haven't gotten into it yet. Our spot checks indicate so far, yeah, no major connectivity challenges as far as we can tell. But yeah, so the game's still going, not over yet. Yeah. So I'm going to pivot into my topic for this week, and it's maybe a week or two old. And I know that we did touch on it. We have touched on this topic in the past, but we've gotten some more reports coming out of the recent 3GPP meeting in Asia. And that's here we are at the 6G podcast, right? And so these 3GPP meetings are super important in terms of propelling this standard down into the into the commercial world. The 3GPP is really the ground zero for developing 6G standards, getting everyone on the same page, releasing these standards to the vendors and the carriers. This is where it's all going down right now. And there's a couple of people who actually posted some retrospectives of what they talked about there in the recent 3GPP meeting in Singapore. We got some LinkedIn reports from some of the SpaceX folks who were there. We got Guy Daniels, who has been writing a bunch about this topic, and then Emil over at Signals Research Group also wrote a really long and really in-depth look at all the different things that the 3GPP looked at during their meeting in Singapore recently. And I thought there was a couple of interesting takeaways, based on this sort of longer look at what they talked about. So they did confirm the sort of initial timeline for the 6G standard. And so, the bottom line is that the stage 3 freeze is December 2028, and then March 2029 is the open API freeze. Basically, that's when they're done with the standard. It can be fully released to operators and vendors. And so that's kind of a big move forward. However, everybody who attended that meeting came to the same conclusion in that they did kick a lot of different cans down the road. So there's still very many parts of the standard that are still to be determined. There's lots of talk about integrating some of the Open RAN efforts that have been in the O-RAN Alliance. They're talking about integrating those standards into the 6G standard. I think there is progress being made on that, but there's still a lot of open questions as to how that's all going to be done. And it gets super technical, super fast. Just tons of acronyms. Really, it's a complex thing that they're working on. And so I think the takeaway from what sounds like the people who have read the documents or attended is that, yes, they did decide on a very basic timeline, but many of the really critical issues that remain to be figured out on the 6G standard, exactly how it'll work, exactly how it'll be implemented, still to be determined. So there's another meeting later this year in the fall timeframe. So it sounds like that's when a lot of those additional decisions are going to be made. But one thing I think is interesting is, how to integrate satellite technology into the 6G standard. There was plenty of discussion about that. And Guy Daniels wrote that there was a proposal to add unpaired TDD spectrum into the scope of 6G study, and there were a number of satellite companies that were very interested in this, but that proposal was not pursued, at least at this point. In there. One of the officials who was from SpaceX who attended this meeting said that consensus was not reached and that there was a lot of debate, but there's still a lot of open questions as to exactly how satellite technology will be integrated into 6G. So I think it's fair to say that Open RAN specifications, satellite specifications, still a lot of work to be done on that 6G standard, and the future 3GPP meetings later this year sounds like that's where a lot of the stuff is going to be decided. So from the very early days of 6G, it's still a lot of things up in the air based on some of the folks who attended that meeting in Singapore recently. So more to be determined when it comes to the 6G standard.
Interesting. I also wonder how long someone like SpaceX has been attending 3GPP meetings for. Because, like Apple, they're like all over the place, but they should also be, attending these meetings, and I think they are. But, they didn't really start until a few years ago. So
Exactly.
I'm really curious about how involved SpaceX is and what they have to contribute, because, the 3GPP is a mutual partnership where people share IP. And, there's cross-licensing agreements that come out of that. But, yeah, it'll be really interesting. Obviously, they probably want satellite to play a more prominent role. I'm still a fan of satellite being a another component carrier. Um, Remains to be seen how prominent that component is, and whether or not that's an anchor. But yeah, it's nice to hear that things are kind of moving along.
Things are kind of moving along. I think it is interesting too that you're right in that. Yeah, I don't think a lot of these satellite companies are necessarily big players in the 3GPP, but as 3G, 4G, 5G, 6G have evolved, we have seen the membership in the 3GPP expand pretty dramatically, as Apple comes on board and a lot of these companies that are not necessarily core to the cellular industry. Qualcomm has been there forever, Ericsson has been there forever, a lot of the carriers have been there forever, but we're seeing some of these new names that are coming into the 3GPP, SpaceX, Apple, those kind of folks. And so I think it is certainly a reflection of the fact that the idea of cellular technology is not siloed as much anymore. It reflects a lot of different players, a lot of different industries at this point. So I think, from that regard, it is interesting. And so, the 3GPP has such a difficult job ahead of it, and always is working to integrate all these different viewpoints and all these companies from all over the world, whether it's Huawei or whether it's Nokia or whether it's Verizon, they all come together in the 3GPP and hash out these standards. So it's really, it's kind of remarkable that they're able to move forward at all, much less at the rate that they are currently doing it. So, it's work that I think sounds very difficult. I'm glad that other people are doing that. I think that would be a very challenging job.
I think that it helps that it's engineers doing this, and engineers arguing with what's pragmatic. The one thing I will say though that I've learned with time as of covering 3GPP and the cellular industry is that sometimes people get features included in 3GPP and they never actually take up, and there's really no intent in taking them, but they're almost like a gimme to that, I don't know, clique or group of people who want that feature to be included. So it's really interesting because I think about some of the features that are that just never took hold, but they're in the standard.
I think it's what is it? LTE broadcast was you broadcast one to many video signals over 4G networks that really took off. Same in 5G. So you're right. There is a lot of those technology standards out there.
Or all this
are technically part of the standard. Yeah.
All the side channel stuff.
Yeah.
So I think there's compromises, but also, not everything that gets in the standard actually gets used. So, I think it's good, and I hope that we, get some real 6G somewhere in the 2030 timeframe, which seems to be the case based on what you said.
So it certainly seems like it. Certainly seems like it's on track.
And that kind of your talk about satellites kind of leads me to my second topic. Which is we have a new LEO satellite alliance, different from the carriers who had their own little JV, which I haven't heard any updates about. I don't know about you, but I haven't heard any updates on that. But this one's called Space Connect, and it's, of course, focused on public interest, public policy, and interest group. And there's a lot of interest in having this kind of push to consolidate interests. This one is between Amazon, Iridium, Telesat, and Globalstar. And there are some people who are also, ex-heads of the NTIA, some other lobbyists. It is being set up as a nonprofit, but really, I think this is the most interesting part is that SpaceX and AST Space Mobile are not included in this. So this is very clearly the other guys who want to be involved. Interesting, Viasat didn't seem to be listed anywhere that I saw here either. But it's just, I think we're in a place where there's a lot of jockeying happening, and I think everybody wants their own interests to be integrated a little bit better. But, it's new. I think they still have, some work to do. But I think there will be more companies that will eventually join this because it's kind of it's still a lobbying entity, and I think it'll be a net positive for the whole industry. Um, but their website is pretty lightweight. There's not much going on it. But I think with time we'll probably see more. Um, Even I went through one of their releases and it says for more information visit website in brackets. So like it's a little bit uh,
Yeah, still another
rough
coat of
around
paint to
the
put on.
edges.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and but it's a U.S. focus, specific to the FCC focused lobbying agency, or I guess
It
Congress.
seems like it seems like it's very much uh, representing non-geostationary satellites, so it's just LEO, and it's really I think it's about lobbying mostly, and maybe consolidating some of the you know uh, efforts around these companies. But it's funny because like Amazon Leo and Globalstar are going to become one company very soon, so it's really going to become like a three-company thing between Amazon, Iridium, and Telesat. So um, that's still not a bad thing. I think having different contributing interests will be a good thing for the industry, but uh, I just think that we're still very early, and I think that's what a lot of people don't understand is like there's so much more to do, and there's so much scale to grow and maturity to happen that like I think people are getting a little ahead of themselves in a lot of ways, um, and I think we're not going to see this shake out for years.
Yeah, it is interesting too. I mean, the satellite industry has been around for decades, but there is so much going on right now. There's so many new technologies. There's so many new issues for them to discuss. And so, yeah, here comes this yet another lobbying group that is only representing, a portion of the industry, not necessarily the whole thing. Yeah, it's. I think there's a lot of. I think you're right. I think that there's a lot of jostling going on right now, both in the regulatory side of things, the lobbying side of things, and really in the, commercial side of things. I mean, I think it was while we were taking our break that the New Glenn rocket blew up on the pad. It really sets back Blue
Oh
Origin
yeah.
quite a bit. And so, yeah, it's been really. I mean, it's. I feel like and SpaceX had its historic IPO while we were on our break too. So like, there's a lot going on in the space industry, satellite industry right now. It's a very after years and years of a relatively quiet industry, it's just really remarkable to watch this whole sector just ramp up. And just have it's the news every day now on the satellite.
Yes. I would also say I'm glad we were on break for the SpaceX IPO because I'm not a big fan.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Especially when you consider that like right now the stock price is what it is with
yeah,
5% float.
yeah.
So yeah, that's going to be a ride I don't want to be on. Um, but I think we're in a place where the attention, like you said, it's just the attention is constant. Whether it's launches or crashes, that was probably one of the most spectacular explosions I've ever seen in my life. Um, and yeah, I just think we're in a place where it's like this is going to be a daily or weekly occurrence, just like with AI. And I also think that there's more and more talk of these orbital data centers that will leverage some of this satellite connectivity. Um, but yeah, I also am skeptical of that. But yeah, I think we're just in a place where it's like there's a lot going on, and
There's a lot going
and,
on.
and there's a lot of need for more spectrum.
Oh, I see what you're doing there. Well done. Pivoting into my next. Couldn't have been better. So yeah, I'll pivot into my next topic, which is speaking of spectrum. One of my absolute favorite things to talk about is spectrum auctions. I was thankful enough to cover the C-band spectrum auction and 3.45 gigahertz, two of the biggest spectrum auctions ever. And so we actually just had a relatively small spectrum auction, but we did have a spectrum auction closed this week. We do not yet know the identities of the winning bidders. Those will probably be released as
Typical.
soon. Was that
I would say that's very typical,
Yeah,
right?
typical. So probably the FCC will release the identity of the winning bidders here in the next few days. Probably as soon as this recording is over, they'll release it. But right now, while we're speaking, we do not yet know who the winning bidders are. But we do know Auction 113, it's AWS-3. It just finished. It was 3.5 billion raised in total winning bids. 17 confirmed bidders, including all the big names, as well as SpaceX. So we were talking about SpaceX, and I'm pretty sure that this is the first time that SpaceX has registered to participate in a spectrum auction geared toward terrestrial cellular usage. And so really what we're going to find out in the next few days when the FCC releases the identities of the winning bidders is, did SpaceX compete against AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile in the pursuit of spectrum at auction? And that is a very big question. No one knows the answer except for the handful of people who run the FCC bidding database. And so it'll be very interesting to see whether SpaceX bid for any of these licenses, though it would be also kind of weird if they did, because the licenses that are up for grabs in auction 113 that just finished, they're kind of scattered all over the country. It's not an auction like the C-band auction was, which is just spectrum everywhere. These are licenses that were actually given up by Dish Network, EchoStar, back to the FCC, and so they're being re-auctioned now 10 years after an initial auction, 12 years after an initial auction. And so they're really, it's really an auction of sort of, spectrum that is mostly just plugging in holes in different places in the country. So, most likely, I think the most likely outcome is that, the usual suspects are the ones who are going to be bidding on this kind of stuff. AT&T and Verizon and T-Mobile most likely will walk away with the bulk of the licenses here. But we could always have a surprise, or we could always have SpaceX buy a bunch of spectrum. I mean, they did buy spectrum from EchoStar, obviously, for their direct-to-device service. And so they participated in this auction. We don't know whether they bid on anything, and if so, how much. But it will be very interesting to see the details of this auction when it's released by the FCC. So we're staying tuned on that. We'll definitely talk about it next week when we chat.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's important for people to know that this is EchoStar's old spectrum. So you covered pretty much all the questions I was going to ask. But I was thinking to myself, like AWS-3, that's mostly going to be AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon. To your point, plugging up holes in their coverage. So it'll be interesting to see what SpaceX does or doesn't do. I'd be inclined to believe they probably don't do much, especially since they had gotten so much spectrum from EchoStar already, and swap that for stock. So now EchoStar is essentially just a SpaceX stock. But yeah, I think spectrum auctions are interesting. I enjoy I think a lot of people don't know that there's 72 rounds in this auction, and the way bidding occurs, and how people bid for things. It's really fascinating, right? It's unlike any auction I've ever heard of, but in the end, it is very demand based, right? The most expensive licenses are the ones that are in most demand, and if nobody wants it, then it only goes to one round, right? So it'll be really interesting to see where there is the most demand. And did EchoStar even have spectrum that was in high demand, or is this more about coverage? So it'll be really interesting to see how this turns out. And does it get lit up as 4G spectrum, 5G spectrum, or are they saving it for 6G? So that'll be interesting as well. But yeah, this is not really extremely in demand spectrum, I would say. Like, it's not like C-band. It's not really, what T-Mobile is using with their I don't even know what band to call that, but it's going to be interesting.
Yeah,
and,
it'll be interesting to see. And I'll say too that a couple of makes me think a couple of points too is that I think the some of the licenses went for hundreds of millions of dollars. There's I think it's New York, Chicago, and Boston are the three big cities that were available in this particular auction. So the idea that somebody at these big carriers, their job is literally to bid, to place a $100 million bid that is somebody's job. And they were doing it multiple times a day, in order to win these licenses. And they didn't know who they were bidding against, right? You just place your bid, and then if somebody matches it, then you just go to you go to the next round. I said, well, what a crazy job is like to bid on $100 million.
You're basically bidding with a mask on your face,
Yeah.
and no one can see your paddle.
And the paddle, yeah, exactly. Well, but I would recommend too. I wanted to mention just real briefly is that there is a reporter named Richard Haas, and he's got a Substack, and he writes about spectrum values, and it's a great read. Highly recommend. He put out a thing about how this auction raised more money than it did when it was first released 12 years ago. And that is actually unique, is that in most parts of the world, spectrum, the value of spectrum and the amount that spectrum auctions are raising is declining. And in the US, that is not the case. And he pointed to a couple of different reasons for that. He said that spectrum licenses in the US are indefinite. They last forever. You can trade them, you can sell them, you can lease them, and they're technology neutral. You can put whatever you want onto this spectrum. And those are the policy reasons why this auction raised as much money as it did, especially compared with spectrum auctions or spectrum allocation strategies in other countries, which I thought was pretty interesting. But yeah.
I was going to say, I have looked at some other spectrum auctions like in India, and like the amount of money they raise is a fraction of even like their huge 5G auction was fairly small in terms of actual money, but they also have much more stringent requirements on utilizing that spectrum. So I guess there's maybe a lot of times when people will bid on spectrum and then let it go, because that's cheaper than just paying a lot and then needing to figure out a way to deploy it and not lose it. But yeah, it's interesting. I will say, I don't think the C-band spectrum auction would have been as big as it was if Verizon wasn't as desperate as they were. I think that would have been a much smaller, less expensive auction for everyone, but they had to get it, right? So it'll be interesting to see what other auctions happen.
And here we go. Ready for this? But spectrum is just one way to augment your network. There's other ways to augment your network, such as, I was going to pivot to your, aren't you talking about MIMO?
Thank you.
That's good, right? That's a good pivot.
I should have been following.
Okay.
I
was just thinking, right? I think MIMO is an augmentation.
That's entirely on me. So
somewhat like spectrum.
So this is an update that I got from Nokia and T-Mobile. And I actually read Monica's article over at Fierce Network about this. And they quoted the Signals Research Group guys who went over to T-Mobile's headquarters to test this capability. And basically what it is it's a 5G feature that is essentially pre-commercial today, but will be commercialized across T-Mobile's network. And it basically showed a way to improve overall throughput using MIMO from Nokia's equipment. And they said that they were able to get as much as a 20% improvement on throughput, which of course improves battery life and overall, device performance. They did this on the S25 Ultra, if I'm not mistaken. So it's not even the newest phone. It's interesting because this is focused on TDD spectrum. And they said that they were really, the feature is really about reducing interference and kind of cleaning up the signal in a way that improves efficiency. I'm glad that there was, Mike had already shared some of the details of these tests. Mike likes to travel all around and do the tests himself when he can. And yeah, it was really interesting to see that this is something that Nokia is able to deliver to T-Mobile as a customer, and that we will most likely see this wherever Nokia infrastructure is available. There is no exact timeline of when it'll be available, but T-Mobile is a mixed house in terms of Nokia and Ericsson, as are most carriers. Right? Nobody's 100% anything. Obviously, that's for a lot of reasons. But this is also likely possible thanks to T-Mobile and their 5G advanced network and being able to enable new features that are on the cutting edge of whatever Ericsson and Nokia are working on. And it'll be fun to see if others are able to take advantage of this. But T-Mobile did not give any real dates of when this will roll out or where. And I'll be honest with you, I am not one who keeps track of which infrastructure vendor is in my market. But sometimes I gander and realize I'm on Nokia or Ericsson, or I can just look up and see, right?
It's pretty neat. I thought that was interesting too, and I think MIMO antenna technology is one of a handful of ways of really making that signal more efficient. You can do carrier aggregation, you can do MIMO, you can split the cell site into two different cell sites. That makes it more efficient. You can add more spectrum. That's more efficient. I was going to say the one thing I think is kind of interesting that I actually didn't know until just recently. So RootMetrics is one of the companies here at Ookla. RootMetrics does drive testing. One of the things that they do is the efficiency of the vendor equipment in the network. So they test Nokia markets in T-Mobile. They test Ericsson markets in T-Mobile's network, and they can rate the efficiency of the RAN equipment by megabits per hertz. And so I actually looked it up. The Nokia's equipment in T-Mobile's network is 3.72 megabits per hertz in terms of efficiency, which is actually exactly equal to the Ericsson markets for T-Mobile, and just a step behind AT&T and Ericsson. And so anyway, it's just like I think that's interesting. That's one way to rank an overall vendor's deployment is megabits per hertz, which is and that's part of what the whole MIMO, that's where it's going, is improving megabits per hertz. That's the whole goal. That's the whole thing. That's the whole game.
Totally. And I'll just add that megabits per hertz is obviously really spectral efficiency, right? So driving spectral efficiency is how you make the most out of the spectrum you paid for. It's how you make out of the power you're spending running the network. So it makes total sense. I didn't know that they did that specific measurement, so that's a really cool one. I'm sure that they gate that with a very, very high price for customers, because it sounds like a very, very informative resource. But I'll say that I'm also curious to see what that, where MIMO goes, because there were some MIMO technologies that I saw from Qualcomm that they were claiming, I think it was like super ultra, some kind of high performance MIMO that would enable them to run 7 gigahertz as if it were C-band, with the same type of footprint. So I think we're going to see more MIMO innovation. This sounds like a software update, but I think we're going to see MIMO continue to evolve into 6G because it has to.
Yeah, higher orders of MIMO for sure. Well, and I'll pivot to my last topic for this week, which is, it's I'm going to bring the mood down a little bit by talking about this one. But it's an example of, as T-Mobile and Nokia and everybody, as they accelerate their technological deployments and really raise the bar, it's increasingly difficult for some of the smaller companies out there to keep pace. And so the example that we just had today was Carolina West Wireless just announced this week that it is transitioning its regional wireless network to Verizon. and will end wireless services by September of this year. Terms were not disclosed, and I got this from our good friend Monica over at Fierce Network. But not absolutely not a surprise. This is just the latest in a long line of smaller and regional wireless network operators to sell their operations to a bigger company, and is really just a reflection of the fact that it is next to impossible for some of these smaller companies to compete, on a nationwide stage. In the early days of wireless, there was tons of these guys out there. Everybody had their own region. And it was very rare to have a nationwide player. But certainly here, as the industry has evolved, there are increasingly fewer and fewer of these smaller companies out there. We did see, so the CCA, Competitive Carriers Association, they represent a lot of these smaller companies. They noted that the Universal Service Fund is intended to support companies like this. So that was their sort of position on this situation. And obviously all of this is noteworthy with ongoing government subsidies to build networks in rural areas, whether it's fiber or wireless, like the BEAD program or the RDOF program. But still, it is the economic calculus for these independent smaller networks in rural areas very challenging. Very challenging. Carolina, and just from an inside baseball perspective, Carolina West Wireless has been a longtime player in sort of the policy, the realm of policy for these smaller players. So to see them sold to Verizon is actually quite a big surprise for those of us who have followed a lot of these smaller carriers, because Carolina West Wireless has been around forever and has been a longtime player and a loud voice in support of smaller carriers. So to see them sell to Verizon is a big surprise and really unfortunate. So wish the best to all of them over at Carolina West Wireless.
When I think about these smaller carriers, I think about US Cellular, and like when that went down, that whole dissolution, I felt like that was like the nail in the coffin for anybody else, right? Because they were the biggest small guy out there, and they were really rural focused, and they couldn't pull it off. So it did not bode well for anybody else after that point. And I also think that like smaller carriers, their biggest challenge is that like people are way more mobile now. And like I feel like now that people are traveling more, they need better coverage, they want nationwide, and that means having to sign, peering agreements and being able to, have some kind of roaming, and all of that costs money. And that just makes them inherently less competitive than if people are like, I'm not going anywhere, I'm not doing anything, I can just be on your network and cost you nothing, right? And I think that's the thing, is like the carriers I think who could be the most successful in this environment are the ones that can either strike really good deals, or ones that like have customers that don't care about roaming or any kind of ancillary costs, right? Because I think, they also have to be innovative and offer services like FWA. And yeah, I think some of them have been left behind by time, and others I just think, got bullied by the bigger carriers, because that's what happens. But yeah, it's sad either way, because I'm a big believer in competition, and whenever there's a competitor that goes away, that's just inherently jacks up prices, right? Like I guarantee you, these people in the West Carolina West region are going to end up paying more for service now. So yeah, that's my biggest disappointment, is like these are the people who are most likely, because West Carolina, that's very rural.
It's very rural. Yeah.
And those people are probably not making much money per month to begin with. So, having wireless costs go up on them is just another pressure on their pocketbook.
Yeah. It is really a reflection of a maturing market, and increasingly competitive. I think few companies make a lot of money from roaming anymore. That was a big source of revenue for these guys, and that's just a lot of that's dried up. So yeah, it's really rough out there, and it's unfortunate, for those of us who cover the industry, because the more voices in the industry, the better, the more perspectives, the more interesting stories, the more innovation that goes on. So yeah, as the number of players decreases, it's a little concerning, right? For those who want to see different things happening in the industry, different perspectives, and more innovation and competition. Yeah. So slightly concerning. So a bit of a sour note. Yeah.
I was going to say it's a little bit of a downer.
A little bit of a downer.
But we'll be back next week with a little bit more of a positive conclusion, hopefully. But other than that, we hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. And if anyone would like to provide insights on a future topic for us to cover for the next podcast, please reach out to us on social media. I'm at Anshel Saad. Mike is at Mike D. Day now. And we hope you have a nice weekend. And don't forget to like and subscribe.